Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from KAYTRANADA called BUBBA. I don't know why I didn't review KAYTRANADA's debut album back in 2016. I mean, I was thinking about it, to be sure. I saw all the critical acclaim, and going back to 99.9% now, I heard a lot of the songs that would slip into the jazzier nightclubs I liked. Hell, he's Canadian. It makes sense that I would have heard of him. And yet I'm perplexed I never took the opportunity to fully explore his work. Maybe it's the watery blend of bassy funk, off-kilter but colorful keyboards, and more texture percussion that struck a lukewarm note for me instead of a hot one, but more likely it was my own tentative steps towards R&B and electronic music where I personally wasn't really ready for it. Now that's not saying I precisely love the album 3 years later, as in now. It's definitely meandering and clocking nearly an hour, and I'm fairly certain I gravitate more to Bad Bad Not Good's rougher textures or Flying Lotus's eccentricity. But you know what? 99.9% was certainly a pretty pleasant listen nowadays that I'm a little more familiar, and one that got me curious to give some real time to the follow-up this December. The guest list looked just as stacked, the construction seemed a bit tighter, and somehow I've hit another year without covering enough electronic music. 2020 should be better, I suspect. Stay tuned for how On the Pulse will turn out. I've already talked about that, but you know what? 99.9% was a really damn good album. What did we get on BUBBA? Well, in all due honesty, if I didn't say in some capacity that I was going to review this in full, it would probably be the sort of project I'd probably not cover in a ton of detail, or before things changed, I would have put this on the trailing edge. Don't get me wrong, BUBBA is good enough for what it is, a loose selection of bouncy, mostly organic electronic songs that don't wear out their welcome and prove that KAYTRANADA can still deliver, but even putting aside the weight, which for me wasn't even really a thing, I feel kind of underwhelmed by this, where even the moments that spark don't quite hit as hard as they really should. If I was being more cynical, I'd say that's probably the reason why it's dropping in early December instead of the middle of the summer in order to satisfy a different set of expectations, because you can imagine this playing more in, say, July or August. But even then, even now, I'm not quite sure it gets there. It's good, but not great. But let's start off with the lyrics and the obvious assertion: they don't really matter. That's not saying that certain artists don't have fun with them here, but the vibe across the sexes, regardless of singer, is where any sort of deeper analysis, that might be the only place it slips in. The men are wallowing in flexing hedonism, and it's an open question from song to song how well it works for their partner, or how much control of it they even have. And the women, they've got some control. They got an idea of what they want from these guys, but feel perpetually unsatisfied with what they're ultimately getting. In other words, in both places, there's not really much in terms of explicit, fulfilling satisfaction or deeper payoff. Kind of an ironic meta-narrative when it comes to the album as a whole, but I'm not going to get that cute with it. But the larger point is that even if you see names like Goldlink or Mick Jenkins, you're not getting a lot in terms of depth or insight. Hell, with Mick Jenkins, you're not even getting much in the way of bars as he brings his croon rapping side to bear, which is not his strongest lane. I like that Sir manages to hit that balance between cocky hedonism and being likable, something that Pharrell can't nail on his verses for the closing song, even in the best of times, and it feels really awkward here, especially with some of the splashes of autotune. But as a whole, it's hard to feel like the lyrics add up to much more of anything, or even that we're getting a particularly magnetic performance here. Yeah, Kelly Uchis sounds fine enough on 10%, but I'm still not as wowed by her as I would like to be. Same with Tinashe on The Worst in Me. Now, the big disappointment came with Estelle on Oh No. For a presence for whose subtle vamping can normally draw me in, I'm just left kinda cold, especially following off of Van Jess on Taste. Now, I'll also say that Teedra Moses sounded really solid on Culture, and Charlotte Day Wilson sounded really great on What You Need, probably the biggest draws of those songs. And you know what, here's the thing, I don't think there's a bad performance on this album. Maybe Pharrell's the closest, but even him, he's not terrible. But if I'm making a comparison to when Fonte showed up on the last KAYTRANADA project, look, there's not the same magnetism or spark or lyrical flair, but honestly, I'd make that statement about a lot of the production here too. Again, not that it's bad, but that it's rarely exceptional or produces any sort of dynamic climax point. The album gets to a pretty solid liquid groove with some nice developed bass lines, a lot of watery keyboards, except for when Pharrell drops his weedy and frankly overused guitar pickup all over the closing track, and it doesn't sound that good even with the attempts at bombast. And then a blend of organic percussion and drum machines. And then this album doesn't leave that lane. It doesn't elevate. And yeah, it's cohesive. It's pretty smooth. Although there are a couple songs where they definitely feel a little more fragmented and piecemeal than they should. Like those weird pieces tacked onto the outros of Taste and Scared to Death and Midsection, which kind of break up the vibe and album flow a bit more than they should. They're really out of place. But as a whole, the project never varies much in momentum or intensity. It sets off something of a melancholic mood of sensual longing, which is fine if you're simply setting up an extended late-night playlist at an after-hours club, but it doesn't feel like there's an arc or shift to the sound beyond playing to various shades of the same tone. Which, you know what? Even that could be fine. You don't need a ton of dimensionality if you really nail the vibe. But unfortunately, there are a couple production quibbles that prevent me from really totally getting on board. The biggest being the odd, warping, slightly compressed filter that he occasionally tacks onto the drum machines, most obviously on Gray Area and Taste. Combined with some of this chill, slippery synths that will slide ever so slightly off key, it perpetuates the odd feeling of unease, where you would expect resolution, but it never really comes, and it doesn't quite feel as organic as I would really like to get into. So you get tracks like the tinny oscillations against the rigid snare of Need It, one of the more interesting progressive drum lines on Oh No, riding off some really ugly synth warbles, the runny elongations of Free Fall with vocals that honestly did not impress me, the oddly spongy percussion on Culture, and the drippy synthesizers on The Worst in Me, and sadly I don't have nearly the same list of highlights to contrast. I guess my favorite groove here is the slightly off-kilter Go DJ, and some of the watery texture on 10% and To the Music. That's good, but I'm not really gripped. I wouldn't call them great. Not helped by when a project that doesn't vary its mood much, this can absolutely drag. And even despite Pharrell trying to make things a little bit more zany and bombastic for the conclusion, doesn't really stick the landing. But I don't know. As a whole, folks, I gave this album a lot more spins and a lot more patience than I originally thought I would. I really tried to get the more sultry and liquid dance grooves moving for me, and yet the lingering feeling is that it was good but never great. There's a part of me that almost thinks this album feels a little bit safe. I'm expecting to hear this in damn near any nightclub I go to in downtown Toronto, guaranteed. And you know what? I'll agree that while it does what it's trying to do really well, it's not really as infectious or as colorful as his debut. It's streamlined, but at the cost of some of the bigger swings. So yeah, for me, it's a very strong 6 out of 10, recommended for the fans or really any promoter looking for an easy project to throw on if the DJ has to cancel and you want to set the vibe. But I don't know, folks. I'm kind of disappointed. I was hoping for a little bit more. That's all. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I know a lot of folks are not going to be happy with what I'm saying here, but folks, I really wanted to like this, but it doesn't take the same chances. It feels very level, very even-keeled, and that can set a good vibe, but in terms of electronic music, it doesn't really vary, and when the lyrics aren't what they really should be, and there are not those standout moments, it does get a little bit distracting for me. But hey, you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. Got the poll up there. I'm curious what you guys think about this. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, when you want to see other album reviews or other episodes of Billboard Breakdown, links in the card right over there. Keep in mind, I got one more scheduled album review before I got, well, what the new series on the Pulse is going to be coming. I talked about that in the last video. And I also have year-end lists coming up as well, and I got an episode of Resonators, so I'm going to be a busy guy for the next little while, so stay tuned for all that. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.